One of the toughest and most uncomfortable headlines of 2024 was the murder trial of now convicted serial killer Jeremy Skibicki. Jeremy Skibicki was handed 4 concurrent life sentences for the first-degree murder of 4 Indigenous women, and he must serve 25 years before he's eligible for parole. The judge in the trial said that he was bound by law to impose the automatic sentence, adding that the women's families deserve more than what could be accomplished in a courtroom. The bodies of 2 of those women, whom are suspected to be in a Winnipeg landfill, are now being searched for after Premier Wab Kinew authorized the search. Joining me now to discuss the case and the search for those two women killed by Jeremy Skibicki is Temur Durrani, national reporter for the Globe and Mail. Temur, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So with the search underway, of course, families never get back what they've lost. But how important is it? And I ask this because I know that you were both in the courtroom and you've spoken closely with the families of the victims. How important is this search from the perspective of closure?
Yeah, it's everything, right? From the beginning, that was really what the families wanted. They wanted form of closure through justice, and justice for them meant getting a dignified funeral for as many of the women in this case as possible. I mean, there's 4 victims that we know of, and that's what this case is about. One of those women, we still don't know her identity. Police have not been able to find out what her name is even, the whereabouts of her remains, and she's the first victim, actually, in fact, according to the trial and what we found out through Jeremy Skibicki himself. Her name has been, she's been named Buffalo Woman to give her that dignity. So dignity is really what this is all about, and it's what it's been from the beginning. The women's families want a funeral. They would like that to happen. And so for that reason, now we're at this point, past the trial where Jeremy Skibicki has been found guilty. He's been sentenced to life, 4 consecutive life sentences, which is what the judge thought, as you just explained, is the highest limit that you can impose on him in here in Canada. At this point, now we're at a stage of the search, which we just reported earlier this month here at the Globe. The province's premier has told us that we're now at the most critical stage of it. So this is the point where they've done all the, building of different constructions around the actual landfill. It's massive. I've been there myself. There's a massive search facility that's been built. It's like a kind of like a conveyor belt sort of a situation. But what they do is they have to do it by hand. And so they have to go inside at a very specific location that's many, many feet below the ground. That's what they're doing at this point. So they've mapped it out. They know exactly where these remains are, and that's what they're going to do there. They've also started finding remains there of, different newspaper articles and receipts that are legible, so they know that it's a date to 2022 when these women were murdered, which is what they're looking for. Specifically that day when that garbage was collected, where their remains were, and how they can find those body parts there to, again, give a dignified funeral. It's important to clarify here that they're looking specifically for just 2 women, and it's not any more at this point that they are aware of there, but more could be found there. One of those women, of course, was already found by Winnipeg Police Service in 2022, Rebecca Contois. However, the Mercedes Meyer and Buffalo Woman and Morgan Harris have not been found.
And do we have an estimate on time frame of how long it may take to actually give the families that dignified funeral that they're looking for and find those 2 women?
Yeah, right now, this has been a multi-year process for sure. So we're looking at, from when we've asked the premier, this might be the longest stage of that process. So of course, they've taken their time to build many different constructions there. So that's taken really all of this year. At this point, this is the stage that they're going to go very slow at. There might be months. They're looking at, well into 2025 towards the end of it, maybe even into 2026 if need be, in order to go down there and really find these remains and be very specific about it. Again, they don't want to disrupt the process. They don't want to go in too hard at it. That's why they're going by hand, really, to search through the remains in order not to, to defeat the purpose, which is that they want to find these remains intact if possible, because that is a possibility here.
We're back with Temur Durrani from the Globe and Mail. Can you walk us through what Mr. Skibicki's defense was and how it changed over the course of the trial?
Right. It's changed a lot. I mean, it's a 2 year long process, right? He was arrested in 2022, just the next day after the last of his four murders. And the way it went about from that point on was that at first he had claimed he was not guilty. And so that's really what the strategy was. For 2 years, he had claimed he was not guilty of any of these four first degree murders. The Crown had constantly said that this is a first degree murder. From the get go, that is what they were pursuing it as.
Hmm.
The defense strategy, however, flipped at the beginning of this trial this year, which is where it concluded, and it went on for months this year, right? And at that point, it was a strategy that became something called the not criminally responsible defense, which here in Canada is our version of what's called the insanity plea.
Yep.
And the way it goes about it is that you are not criminally responsible. You may have committed the act, but you have to reach this very high bar to prove to the court that you are, in fact, not criminally responsible for the acts that you are being accused of doing, that you could not be possibly, your brain could not possibly be able to comprehend the guilt of committing those acts. And so thereby the court needs to find you in a very interesting way guilty of the act, but not guilty of being able to understand the act to the degree of the law. So, first degree murder might not be the degree you get by the end of it. Of course, this was the strategy that they came about at the beginning of the trial, at the eve of the trial. By that point, they had been constantly arguing not to have a jury and to go for a judge alone trial. That's what the defense was arguing. But one day, literally before a jury was supposed to be convened and it was already established, everything was going to happen. That's when he said, his lawyer said that he is now not criminally responsible. And so the Crown, which had been wanting a jury this whole time, completely flipped and then decided to say, now we do want a judge alone trial as well. So this trial was all seen before a judge because of this flip in the script. By the end of a months-long trial, however, the judge found that he was in fact guilty on all counts, that he was, he was not criminally responsible,
Hmm.
NCR, which again is a very high bar in Canada. Statistics Canada stats that we've compiled here at the Globe have shown that it is a 0.0005% chance for you to be, found NCR here. It's a very, very, very low, low barometer for you to get to that point. It's a very difficult case to present, and the judge found that that was not the case here.
Okay. And I mean, thinking bigger picture, I mean, this case was a national headline for months, if not the year, going back actually into previous years. It overlays into the ongoing concern of missing and murdered Indigenous women. What steps are needed to be taken to prevent cases like this from happening where they're clearly targeted? What can be done, or what is being discussed to be done?
hmm I mean, this case was really at the heart of last year's provincial election here in Manitoba. In fact, actually, most people voted based on this. This is what became
Hmm.
the crux of that election, where Mr. Canoe, Wab Canoe, he was elected as premier. There was a government, the Progressive Conservative government, which was arguing that they do not want to find the remains of these women that are out there in these landfills because it was too unsafe and it was too costly. That was their measure. In fact, there were, billboards all around the
Yeah.
province, all around the city. It became a big national moment for that reason because an election was being sought about, really the province deciding what's the right steps that the province wants to take, whether that is looking for these women or not, and that's the
Yeah.
government you'll elect, the current one that was in charge at the time, or do you want a new government that is going to go out looking for them? That's why it's a national headline. It's been that way because it was a political situation. These
Hmm.
women's families were put through this political ringer. And so when Mr. Canoe was elected, there was a lot of eyes on him, mine included. I became our Manitoba Bureau Chief for that reason. We started
Yeah.
looking into this case for that reason because a lot of the country wanted to see what he was going to do here. And he has met that promise. He's in
Yeah.
fact continued it throughout the trial. And at this point, this search is ongoing for that reason. At this point, we are at a juncture now where fulfillments need to happen, right? And so that's why this became such a big headline.
Yeah.
We're at that point where we're now trying to see if these women's remains will be found, what will that look like? And that's where we're at. So that's still a long process. How it became a critical point is because of what's happened across this country with Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people for,
Of
for
course.
generations, right? And
Yeah.
that's where we're at. We're kind of looking at a point where this case became representative of that crisis.
Temur, I really appreciate you taking the time and your coverage on this story as it developed throughout the year. and appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.